Their images are etched in the earth, and legends proclaim they created the wonders of the world. From fictionalized villains to real-life heroes, through scriptures, folklore, and mythology, they are woven into the fabric of history.
Giants are the personification of all the problems that mankind must overcome in this hostile world.
They're in our fairy tales and our nightmares.
Giants are relevant to us because they tell us about our own past.
Legends tell how their colossal strength moved mountains and how their iron will could move a nation.
We naturally change these stories in a way that helps us understand the world at our time.
They represent the struggle between good and evil in ancient religions, and they remind us all of the undeniable power of the human spirit. Giants, friend or foe, next on the History Channel. 50 feet tall, the strength of 200 men, the fortitude of a Roman army. Legends, myths, and ancient folklore tell powerful tales of giants that held up the heavens and walked the earth.
In so many cultures, there seems to be that little grit of sand that there was a giant species once roaming the earth or the locality, and it's around that grit that the pearl of the legends of the giants has formed itself.
Regardless of race, region, religion, or age, every society has created legends about giants as a way to help explain the unknown.
In cases where large formations are found or bones are discovered that can't be explained or giant footprints, it's very common to imagine a race of giants that walked the earth and left those remains.
Giants also, I believe, represent dream figures, figures of the imagination, figures of nightmares. It's natural that out of those dreams come stories of giants.
The origins of giant stories can be traced to the dawn of man. Nordic cultures were among the first to equate giants with the beginning of civilization. They were called frost giants, mammoth human-like creatures who were as tall as mountains.
There is, in Norse mythology, a world of light and a world of mist. And the world of mist is very cold, and the mythology is that a warm wind blew up from the world of light, created clouds in the world of mist, and from that clouds, a breed of giants emerged, the so-called frost giants.
The frost giants were particularly ferocious, but were also incredibly clever. They represent the forces of chaos.
In a battle for superiority of the earth, the frost giants fought an army of Norse gods led by a warrior named Thor.
Thor, son of Odin, led a number of campaigns against the giants into an area in which nothing could live except giants.
To battle the frost giants, Thor wielded walls of thunder and bolts of lightning, the power that later became known as Thor's hammer.
The threat of the frost giants and also of the lesser and more barbaric storm giants had been known for quite some time. And so the heroes were gathered together so that they could fight the giants.
Thor, along with the other gods, fought a ferocious fight against the frost giants. Ultimately, it was the wisdom of Thor's father that persuaded the frost giants to surrender.
In the end, it was the extreme authority of Odin which finally sent them back into their darkness.
But it was the Greeks and Romans, some of the world's first true storytellers, who created the types of giant legends that still exist today. There were gods like Hercules and Zeus, who often were depicted as being the size of 100 men. And there was a race of giants called the Titans, and a god named Atlas, who many believe held up the earth, but actually was doomed to forever hold up the sky.
There is a figure by the name of Perseus who comes to try and defeat Atlas. Perseus takes the head of Medusa and shows it to Atlas, which turns him to stone, and as a result, that's where mountains come from. And with his strength, the strength of mountains, he's holding up the sky and the stars in the heavens.
The ancient world was also filled with snarling, grotesque, one-eyed giants called Cyclops that devoured man and animal alike. It's believed that some of these creatures also had second sight, the ability to see the future and predict the fate of men. Though they are the stuff of fiction, the story of the Cyclops is actually based in archaeological fact.
The story of the Cyclops is a very interesting story on many levels, but one of the points that interests me the most is that the concept of the Cyclops probably comes from finding the head of a mastodon or an elephant. Because if you look at the skull of those animals, they have a big round hole where the trunk comes in, and the actual eye holes are on the sides. So it looks just like a Cyclops. It looks like this would have been the head of a giant round-eyed monster.
One of the best-known versions of humans battling these creatures was when Ulysses kept a Cyclops from devouring his men. Ulysses and his sailors encountered a Cyclops when they landed on a magical island inhabited only by giants. The men were trapped in a cave blocked with a huge rock that only the Cyclops could remove.
The Cyclops has sheep, which he eats, and herds, and every day he goes out with the herd. At that point, Ulysses and his men figure that they will take wine and try to get the Cyclops to sleep, and then take a huge stick and try to gouge the eye out. And so they sneak under the sheep's belly, and the Cyclops is trying to feel around for them, but only feels the top, and they're able to escape.
And so the triumph of the civilized man over the great barbaric pagan, no matter about the strength, brain over brawn, is evident from the story.
Most early cultures, especially religions like Christianity, used stories of giants to accentuate their message.
These were the pagans who had to be defeated. So they gave them attributes like monstrous strength, destruction of property, even down to eating human flesh, especially that of children. And this put them beyond the pale. Giants were the last vestiges of the old pagan religion, which had to be destroyed.
Perhaps the most famous story depicting sheer courage against overwhelming odds comes from the Bible's book of Samuel. It's a story about a young shepherd boy named David who was willing to pit his limited skill and strength against the champion of the Philistines, Goliath.
David and Goliath story actually for me is one of my childhood. It was part of our culture that we should have this image of some intelligent, small, underprivileged person who is going to go right out there and help everybody else to understand how to overcome adversity.
At this time, the Israelites were in a pitched battle with their archenemy, the Philistines. It said the Philistines had a legion of giant warriors, and the leader of these behemoths was a towering, evil killer named Goliath.
Goliath is described as being 6 cubits and a span in height, which translates to about 9 feet 9 inches. Now, in earlier texts, including the texts found among the Dead Sea Scrolls, it's 4 cubits and a span, which would translate to be 6 feet 9 inches. So I believe that Goliath was indeed a Philistine warrior, and at that time, a warrior who was 6 feet 9 inches would indeed be a giant, certainly towering over the shepherd boy.
Each day he would come down to the river and challenge the Israelite army to come and send out a champion who would fight him. The prophet Samuel said that Goliath could be defeated and that he would be defeated by a boy.
David volunteered to take on Goliath, armed only with his slingshot. It was a skill he had honed as a boy, protecting his flocks from roaming packs of wolves. It was a simple weapon he would take into battle.
The giant, in an arrogant moment, says, "Why have you sent this shepherd boy? I will eat him alive, and I will throw his carcass to the sheep."
David took his sling and a few well-rounded pebbles.
He swung and fired a stone, which caught Goliath in the middle of the head. It was enough to kill Goliath.
In a final act of defiant victory, David placed his foot on Goliath's lifeless body and cut off his head. The victory so shocked the Philistines that they fled in disbelief that a mere shepherd boy could wield such a blow.
It serves to demonstrate the victory of the children of God over the forces of paganism, and the forces of paganism embodied in a massive man, Goliath.
The story also illustrates how the image of a giant can be used as a moral lesson to show how the meek can defeat seemingly insurmountable odds.
We have here a story for people to gain courage from those, even though you might look the weakest, is to use your intellect, to use your courage, and to use a sense of pride to go forward and to take it on.
At the heart of the David and Goliath story is the idea that it doesn't matter how big you are on the outside, it matters how big you are on the inside. And David was huge inside. He had a heart of courage, and he alone was not afraid to fight Goliath.
There's another aspect that follows through of the popularity of this being told from parents to children, and that is that David, as the young, unpromising hero who's crude and inexperienced, is akin to children, and this is a coming-of-age moment proving himself and his manhood.
Giant stories are plentiful in the Bible, and many times giants are seen as heroes, as in the case of St. Christopher, who once helped the Christ child cross a river.
St. Christopher put the child on his back and started to cross the river. But as he was going through the river became deeper, the child became heavier, and the river became wider. Then, as all of these tribulations started to take part, he then decided, I can't allow a child to fall. I must carry on. So he carried on until at last he came to the other side, and the child became the vision of Christ.
But giants were not just relegated to the land of morality tales in ancient religions. Over time, legends of giants grew to impact the culture of an entire nation.
When the Celts arrived on these shores, they found the standing stones, the burial chambers, and they were so great that the Celtic imagination, the Celtic storytelling tradition, came to see that these must have been built by giants.
You're watching Giants, Friend or Foe, on the History Channel. If there is one place on Earth that can lay claim to being the true land of giants, it is the British Isles. Celtic culture and history are filled with hundreds of references to the giant kind, both friend and foe. On a rolling field of yellow grass 2 hours southwest of London, multi-ton boulders make up an archaeological site of gargantuan importance. Stonehenge.
The story that Stonehenge was built by giants belongs really to that very colourful weaver of tales, Geoffrey of Monmouth, the Welsh monk who in 1136 published his History of the Kings of Britain. According to Geoffrey of Monmouth, Stonehenge was originally in Ireland, and Uther Pendragon, the father of King Arthur, ordered Merlin to bring the stones from Ireland to Stonehenge to mark a burial place of several local chieftains and princes.
Although some versions of the story say it was Merlin, others tell that it was a British king named Vortigern, who after defeating a race of English giants dispatched them to Ireland to retrieve a group of special stones.
Off they went, and across the sea, they carried the great stones back. These were erected on Salisbury Plain by command of Vortigern himself, who said that Stonehenge would serve ever after as a marker to those brave followers of his who had died fighting the giant kind. And there it remains to this day.
The last of this race of giants who are credited with building Stonehenge are Gog and Magog. The legend says they were defeated by the Romans and brought to England to protect the city of London. Today, statues of Gog and Magog still have a place of prominence in the old city's government building, the Guildhall. The statues themselves have a storied past. They were destroyed during the Great Fire of London in 1666. They were rebuilt but destroyed again in 1940 during the German blitzkrieg of the city. In 1953, they were built a third time and given a place of honor high above the floor in the building's Great Hall, though it is questionable whether most Britons know who they are.
Many who visit the Guildhall probably look up at the two statues and just wonder who on earth these two characters are, little realizing perhaps that these were amongst the original inhabitants of this island, so legend claims.
The majority of English giant stories are found not in the bustle of London, but in the picturesque, antiquated villages that dot the British countryside. The town of Cernobos is a good example. Founded in 987, it remained a thriving community until the mid-16th century when its abbey closed and the village fell into disrepair.
In about the 17 and 1800s, it took on a new lease of life because the water here was very pure. And suddenly Cerne found itself as a center of a major brewing industry in the south. And in fact, its beer not only was sort of pushed around all over this country, but I'm told it was also exported to the West Indies and the Americas.
Today, it is a picture postcard town, attracting tourists from around the world who want to see centuries-old pubs and restaurants, and arguably England's largest giant. One of the many tales portrays the giant as an invading Danish monster who came across the sea and after a day of pillaging, fell asleep on a hillside. The locals living in the area proceeded to cut off his head. To warn other giants to stay away, they made an enormous chalk outline of their fallen prey. The giant is made from tons of small white stones that are cleaned and replaced every 7 years. The giant measures 180 feet in height. He carries a massive club and is best seen from the air. However, the giant's most prominent feature, one that can still make the people of Cernobos blush, is the towering chalk outline of his phallus.
I think the main statement is about 30 feet long, which I think one lady who was being interviewed said that would bring the tears to your eyes, and I think that sums it up, actually.
Of course, nobody really knows when the giant was carved. There's many different stories. Some say he's a fertility symbol. In fact, so much so that it is rumoured in the locality that courting couples and married couples have been known to consummate their relationship on his...
If a girl getting married wants to have children, what you should do is go up there with your husband and stay overnight up there. And in fact, I've heard it done, but what its success rate is, I'm not sure. But occasionally when we have weddings here in the church, the bride and bridegroom will go up there in their wedding dress and go up there and so symbolically sort of sit on the giant and hope that it brings them good luck in their married life with children.
While the Cernobos giant catches attention for his sexual prowess, another English giant draws crowds simply because he gets up and walks. He's called the Bolster Giant, and he lives in the small English village named St. Agnes.
The giant Bolster of St. Agnes was so tall that he could stand with one leg on top of St. Agnes Beacon and his other foot could reach as far as Carn Bray, which is about 5 miles away.
Every May, the people of the town bring out the effigy of the giant and parade him along the towering cliffs above the sea, a place where the locals say they see the face of the giant on the side of mountains. Legend has it that along these cliffs, the giant met and fell in love with the beautiful and devout St. Agnes.
Now, the fact that the giant had a wife mattered not, because giants were considered to be incredibly lustful. That was one of their attributes. And so he became infatuated with the blessed St. Agnes and asked her to marry him, or asked her to live with him in any case. Now, she, being a virtuous Christian lady, refused, but the giant was nothing if not persistent. And so he tormented her daily, sending her gifts of dead animals. I could think of better gifts, but remember that this is a rather stupid giant.
She knew that he was terrifying the whole of the village, that somehow or other the village had to get rid of him, so she agreed to marry him on one condition, that he filled her well with his blood.
And the stupid giant believed her, and slashed his wrist and allowed blood to fall into the hole. Gradually, the giant bled to death, which shows a triumph of virtuous Christianity over the stupid paganism, if you like.
The story has been told in St. Agnes for at least 400 years. It's believed it was started during a time when the Catholic Church was doing everything it could to demonize other religions.
One of the interesting things about the early church is that, of course, the church is trying to stamp out the Celtic faith, the Celtic religion. And the way it's doing it is to assimilate that Celtic religion into its own religion. So Celtic giants effectively then become demonized. So the church will create demons. Where the Celts saw a giant, the church sees the devil. Where the Celts made a rock formation the work of giants, as far as the church is concerned, it's the work of devils. So effectively the devil is becoming, if you like, the giant of the Christian religion. And yet, so strong is this folklore that it's still circulating.
For the townspeople of St. Agnes today, their Goliath is a vivid reminder of nature's dark side, which must be conquered.
He represents anarchy. Essentially, he comes from the ground and he is tamed. So he's the wilder spirit, the wilder element of us. So he's disorder, but we love him.
The Bolster giant is well known along the shores of Cornwall, but his notorious antics pale in comparison to another nearby giant named Cormoran.
Cormoran, the ferocious giant, used to live on the mount, and each night he would come striding across the bay to pillage and plunder the local households. He would kill the cattle, kill the sheep, rob the crops. He was the terror of the neighborhood.
Legend says Cormoran's reign of terror continued until one boy decided he'd had enough. You're watching Giants, Friend or Foe, on the History Channel. Along the rocky shores of Western England, in the seaside towns of Cornwall, the world's most famous giant stories were born. This is the land that spawned the sagas known as Jack the Giant Killer and Jack and the Beanstalk. As with most folklore, the tales were attempts by locals to make sense of their world by creating stories of danger, morality, and religious symbolism.
Talking about Jack the Giant Killer, there are actually many traditions that come together. There is a reference to biblical legend with David using trickery to outwit the giant, and you see this in the Jack the Giant Killer. There's also this idea of the young lad, the name Jack from nursery rhymes, Jack and Jill. Many folklorists assert it comes from the idea of Jack being a youthful figure.
The stories also tried to make sense of the area's raw natural beauty and physical hazards. The most spectacular feature of the region is a craggy speck of land, less than a mile out to sea, called St. Michael's Mount.
Well, we're in the southwest of the country. We're in Cornwall, the magical land of giants, on a boulder-strewn shoreline, standing next to the causeway that leads to the magical St. Michael's Mount. It truly puts it into perspective, for as you can see, it would take a giant of a man to be able to stride from the island onto the mainland.
Even today, just getting to the mount can be treacherous. Ocean tides play tricks with visitors, quickly and quietly swallowing the stone path that connects the island with the mainland.
When the tide's in, you'd have to be a giant to get over there.
It's said that St. Michael's Mount was built by a giant named Cormoran, who entrusted his wife Cormelia to build it with the finest white quartz rock she could find.
Cormelia got exhausted with this daily trek to find these perfect stones, and one day as she trekked out, found a piece of ordinary green stone and thought that would do. So come striding back towards the island she did, and Cormoran, seeing her approach with an inferior product, was so angered he stepped out of the bay and gave her a hefty kick, causing her to drop the rock here on the approach to the causeway.
It's said that 600 years ago, people were tormented by the ruthless Cormoran, who, along with his brothers, lived in the towering castle on the mount.
Cormoran was the bane of the territory. He'd wade across to the mainland every night. He would kill cattle, sheep. He would take the produce from the farms and then go back to his rocky lair on St. Michael's Mount.
One day, a teenage farm boy decided he and his family had been terrorized enough. If the town's leaders could not kill the giant, he would. The boy's name was Jack. There are several versions of how Jack attacked the giant. One story has him hiding in Cormoran's shoe and riding back to the castle to discover the treasure trove of riches the giant and his brothers had amassed.
It was rumored that the giants were incredibly wealthy. Being long-lived and incredibly old, they had amassed great fortunes through their wickedness and paganism. This was lying in the vaults of their castle, and Jack was determined to see what was in there.
After the giants fell asleep, Jack crawled out of Cormoran's shoe and moved up the giant's shirt.
The giant stirred, and he said, "Who is climbing inside my shirt?" To which Jack replied, "Go back to sleep, it is only a fly crossing your chest." And the giant lay back and closed his eyes. Jack produced a large knife and cut the giant's throat. Jack went down into the basement, which was piled high with gold and silver. And Jack and his family never had to worry about inflation again.
Another version of the story has Jack brave the frigid North Atlantic waters and swim to St. Michael's Mount. He then dug a pit large enough to trap the giant.
At this point, Jack the Giant Killer blew his horn and roused the sleeping Titan. And Cormoran looked to see who it was that had disturbed his slumber and saw Jack standing on the other side of the deeper pit. So he utters to Jack the threat, "You saucy villain, how dare you disturb my rest? I shall broil thee for my breakfast." And so saying, he races at Jack and tumbles headlong into the deep pit. Jack then picks up his pickaxe and embeds it deep into Cormoran's skull and kills him outright.
When the villagers heard the youth had killed Cormoran, they dubbed their hero with a title, Jack the Giant Killer. The tales can be traced to the 15th century, a time when the world was rife with religious turmoil. Once again, stories of evil, immoral, pagan-like giants helped church leaders cast a shadow of wickedness on those who opposed them. But young Jack's exploits did not end with his victory at St. Michael's Mount. Storytellers of the time put his character to good use.
First of all, he becomes the trusted servant of King Arthur's son, kills several more giants in that guise, and is then able to trick one giant out of a very useful weapon, the Cloak of Invisibility. In fact, King Arthur, by this stage, is so pleased with Jack's giant-killing exploits that he makes him a Knight of the Round Table and gives him the task of ridding Wales of the many giants that are terrorizing the kingdom of Wales.
Jack was given the task of killing a particularly nasty, two-headed giant named Thundel.
Thundel might not be able to see Jack thanks to Jack wearing the Cloak of Invisibility, but he can certainly smell him, and thus it is from his lips are first issued perhaps what is the best-known utterance of the entire saga. Fi, fi, fo, fum.
I smell the blood of an Englishman. Be he alive or be he dead, I'll grind his bones to make my bread.
Unfortunately, Thundel is easily outwitted by Jack, who lures him onto a drawbridge that he's booby-trapped, and consequently Thundel crashes through the drawbridge and Jack promptly decapitates him.
Regardless of the version, one thing that is constant in the early variations of the Jack story is violence. Jack is always an outmatched youth who uses his wits to cut the throat of his enemy or chop off his head.
This theme that is found in earlier tales where they were meant for adults as well as for children poses the giant as carnivorous or cannibalistic. They want to not only defeat us, but they want to devour us. And there are other variations of this as well in other stories. The Jack figure lodges with the giant, and the giant says, "Though you will lodge with me tonight, you will not live to see the morning light. I will bash your brains with my club outright."
But during the 19th century Victorian era, the character of Jack the Giant Killer suddenly changed. The British printing industry began churning out children's books, and it was impossible for publishers to tell tales with so much violence.
The traditional Jack the Giant Killer is effectively a psychopath, a vicious thug embedding his pickaxe into giants' heads, decapitating giants. By Victorian times, the giant stories have settled into the domain of children's literature.
Jack was no longer a noble giant killer with King Arthur's court. Instead, he became a Victorian version of a teenage slacker, complete with the repressed sexual themes of the times. This tale is perhaps the most famous giant story in the world, Jack and the Beanstalk.
The traditional Jack and the Beanstalk story, of course, has Jack as a lazy gopher and idler, and his mother is always nagging him to go out and do better. And, of course, they are a very poverty-stricken household.
It all begins with a cow that no longer can give milk. Jack's mother tells her son to take the cow into town and sell it at the market.
There's a lot of speculation about the reason why the cow is being sold is because it no longer has milk. So it's this maternal symbol, and Jack needs to break away from the mother. At the same time, he wants the approval of the mother.
Jack, of course, is very easily taken in by what might well be called a con man at the market. And the man says, well, I'll take the cow, but all I have is these beans, but they're magical beans. So Jack happily accepts the magical beans.
When Jack's mother discovered what her son had done, she scolded him for being so foolish. She threw the beans and they took root in the rich soil next to a stream. The following morning, Jack woke to find a towering beanstalk where the beans had landed. Jack could not resist the temptation.
The great psychologist Bruno Bettelheim, in his book, The Uses of Enchantment, offers a very detailed and elaborate what I would call a Freudian analysis of the story, emphasizing the idea that it's about a boy breaking away from his mother and moving into sexuality as an adult male. And of course, the concept is the cow no longer gives the milk. You know, the mother doesn't give the milk. The boy has these erotic dreams. He wakes up and finds this phallic beanstalk climbing to the sky.
Cautiously, Jack climbed the stalk's gnarly trunk into the clouds, where he found the kingdom of a giant.
Firstly, he escapes with money, Secondly, he escapes with a goose that lays a golden egg. And the last time, it is a golden harp which sings to the giant. But this time, the harp calls out, "Master, master, someone is stealing me." And the giant wakes up and pursues Jack to the top of the beanstalk.
Jack suddenly acquires the heroic virtues of Jack the Giant Killer, manages to shin down the beanstalk and chop down the beanstalk, causing the giant to fall to his death.
And Jack and his mother live happily ever after on the proceeds which he has got in the giant's kingdom.
Since the mother is often portrayed as a widow and Jack is an only child, this giant is in fact a kind of father figure who he also needs to defeat to exact his revenge. Sometimes actually in the story, it will be announced that the giant was the murderer of his real father. So there's a double conflict that's going on. So one of the moral justifications for stealing is to exact revenge.
Well, the beanstalk is only the added part to the story, where he goes because his family are in adversity, and he goes and gets great wealth by defeating a giant. And what could be a better story for a child? Overcoming adversity and keep going, keep at it, and in the end you'll be successful.
I think there's also a simpler, even deeper meaning to the story, and that goes back to a basic human desire to climb to the heavens and discover great beings.
Created on the British Isle, Jack and the Beanstalk remains one of the most famous giant stories of all time. But on a nearby shore, a tall tale of another renowned giant remains an important part of Irish heritage, the legend of Finn McCool.
They said he was as strong as a lion. When he was in bad temper, he stamped his feet and you had an earthquake around the whole of Ireland.
But it's the question of how this unusual formation of rocks on the edge of the North Atlantic was created that has the Irish asking, could it have been built by their beloved giant, Finn McCool? You're watching Giants, Friend or Foe, on the History Channel. Since the beginning of time, people have struggled to find ways to explain the creation of massive, larger-than-life natural phenomenon. Before the benefit of modern science, the answer most often agreed upon could be summed up in one word: giants.
When early men began to view great boulders, great stones, great circles, which had been left either by previous peoples or by glacial action, they began to wonder how these sort of things could have come about. The answer for them, as a means of explanation, was that they could only have been carried there by giants.
Giants are so often associated with rocks and mountains. It's easy to look up at the mountains around us and imagine that these are giants who have been frozen in time for some reason, whether they're evil, whether it's magic, or whether they're just the remains of the old ones who once walked the earth.
But in the mystical land of Ireland, giants are not just relegated to the realm of simplistic folklore. One of the best-known Irish giant stories was written during a time of British domination over the Emerald Isle in the early 18th century by a young man studying to be a cleric. The author's name was Jonathan Swift. The story he wrote was Gulliver's Travels.
Gulliver's Travels is actually a satire in which a giant appears. The giant is, of course, Lemuel Gulliver, who is an ordinary seaman, who is shipwrecked on the shores of a country of pygmies. The country is Lilliput. Finding Gulliver on their shores, they are immediately taken with his size.
There are all kinds of escapades that are involved where Gulliver ends up having to help the Lilliputans. One of the ones that I think people tend to remember is where there's a great palace fire and Gulliver ends up urinating on the palace in order to save it and therefore bond himself to the Lilliputans. And there's this uneasy relationship with him as benefactor, as well as the same time being treated as a kind of king, which he doesn't want to be.
The Lilliputians saw this giant not as a scientific curiosity, but as a weapon they could use to wage war against their enemy.
Swift was playing on the old confrontational notion of the giants, which is innate in every one of us, where the big man will dominate, whether he is big physically or whether he is big politically. And so what you're getting is a sort of allegory of politics. And the giant becomes the symbol of a corrupt political system being used towards an end, which is what Swift was actually talking about.
What many people don't realize is that there's a postscript to that the voyage that follows is in fact to America, where Gulliver is smaller than the people he encounters. So suddenly he is the dwarf compared to the giants. And in many ways, this may be a prophecy of things to come because he sees the great power of this breed of giants on the American soil and imagines, in fact, that they're likely to defeat English manners and their arrogance.
Along the coast of Northern Ireland, near the town of Bushmills, folk musicians fill the pubs with the soundtrack of storytelling tradition.
It was down by the Sally Gardens, my love.
The songs are rich with images of lonely lives and lost loves, Celtic magic and mystery, Irish intrigue and illusion. It is a sound that echoes across the rolling green fields and muddy moors to a place steeped in Irish lore. Because less than a mile from where the band plays and pints of Guinness pour like water is one of the most captivating and baffling rock formations in the world. For thousands of years, the Irish have tried to explain the origin of this place. Millions of hexagonal stones that cascade from a mountaintop and disappear into the Irish Sea. People come from all over the world to see the stones, making it the most popular attraction in all of Ireland. The Irish have given it a name, the Giant's Causeway.
When, for example, men came to look at something like the Giant's Causeway, they said, who could have constructed this? This cannot have been constructed by nature. Look at how the hexagonal shapes are laid out. This could only have been constructed by thinking individuals. And so the answer was giants.
The scientific explanation is the stones at the Giant's Causeway were made by a volcanic eruption millions of years ago. When the hot lava was quickly cooled in the frigid seawater, the unique shape of the stones was formed. The causeway was the perfect place for the imaginations of early Irish storytellers to take flight.